depending on your environment as well. So, health foods versus not so healthy foods. If you think about the comparisons in these pictures here, you can see that the salad sandwich, and below that there's two blocks of fat and 2 blocks of sugar. There is a very small amount of sugar and fat in the wholemeal sandwich. Well, and that's actually a white bread sandwich, but ideally it would be a seeded grain wholemeal sandwich with some protein in it, filled with some nice salads, okay? If you look at the next item along, that's white bread and it's processed meat. It doesn't have very much vegetable in it at all. It's got cheese, which is probably processed cheese with some fats that you would rather avoid. Look at the fat content. It's way higher. It has some sugar in it as well. That's because it's white bread. So your whole grain form of bread would have less. And then look at the next one along the pie. Look at how much fat pastry and pie fillings and sauces have in them. That's got less sugar in it, but a huge amount of fat. So you're going to overdose on fat intake, but not only that, it's hydrogenated oil that you're getting that fat from. You'd much rather get essential fats than eat something like that. That is why pies are considered less than ideal for your good nutrition. Also, looking at the next thing, look at the volume that those foods take up. Look at the volume of the sandwich, the salad sandwich, and look at the size of the pie. The pie takes up nearly half the space when you eat it. So you're going to be hungrier faster, but you've also probably doubled your calorie intake. So you can see how that can add up, and you can increase your calorie intake rather than reducing it when you eat more whole foods. Moving along, a lot of people, iced coffee is a favorite, especially here in Australia. Everybody relies on their iced coffee in the morning. They might skip breakfast. Really, that's a source of caffeine, so that's not really good for you on that, just that by itself. But also look at the sugar content. If you look at the classic and the next one along, that one has a huge amount of fat in it, but also a massive amount of sugar. So the nutrients, consider the nutrients you're getting for that fat and sugar. Not very much. There's no fiber, none of the things you might need for breakfast. You'll be much better to make sure you have some protein and something healthy for breakfast rather than those things, and try and reduce those. Try and make the things you drink low-calorie beverages, okay? If you look at the lower fat one, it's got, yes, a reduced fat, but look how much more sugar it has. So caffeine together with sugar really stimulates your insulin release. So that's not going to have a good effect on your insulin control, which doesn't help give you a nice lean body fat, lower body fat. Coca-Cola, that's pure sugar, really definitely has a bad effect on your insulin because it's also full of caffeine. It's addictive. People often rely on that to give them an energy boost because they're not eating very well in the first place. Okay, now looking at cereals, people think they advertise some of these cereals as good sports foods. Well, the best type of cereal to eat is rolled oats, okay? It's an unprocessed grain. That's what you want to think about. Any cereal, think first, is it an unprocessed grain? None of those items there are an unprocessed grain. So always try and get back to your basics and try and avoid processed cereals. If you look at the Nutri-Grain, it's got a lot of sugar. Not very much fat, but a lot of sugar. There's not going to be very much protein in that, and not a lot of fiber either. So you're much better off to go for something which has a fiber content and also a lot more nutrients in it, which your oats, your quinoa, even brown rice would be fine. It's better than eating those. Wheat Bix, it's advertised as one of Australia's best breakfast cereals. It's a whole grain. They do process it, but they also process it to such a fine degree that it's high GI. So it's low in sugar and fat, but it's going to be high GI as well. So unless you're adding something like yogurt or protein to that, it's still going to get into your bloodstream really fast. So you're still better off with something like oats, okay? And Cocoa Pops, well, they've got a whole lot of sugar, and it really just loads your blood sugar, and it's not ideal for breakfast, especially if you're trying to train and get lean and you want good energy levels. Now, looking at pretzels, people think, oh, pretzels are a good thing to eat when you're trying to cut back. They're very high in sugar content, really, when your body breaks down all that flour. So very high on the insulin, okay? You need to add some protein to that intake. All right, next thing, crisps are extremely high in fat. You want to avoid party crisps and even nuts, especially the ones that have got oil added, the ones that are not, just raw nuts. Always trying to choose raw nuts. It's the added oils to nuts that are not good, okay? The next thing along is cheese, different types of processed cheese. Processed cheese is always better to be avoided. If you're going to eat cheese, try and eat the least processed one, and don't have it often. Cheese is a very processed or a very concentrated food, and it's very high in fat. So you're much better off going for one of the healthiest dairy items to go for is yogurt, low-fat yogurt. It's got your probiotics in it, it's much better for you, and it has a higher water content and less fat. If you're looking at the biscuits and common things that people eat, good old, what's those chocolate coated things that everybody eats? Tim Tams, yes. Very Australian. Very, very high in sugar and fat, and they're also extremely dense. Yes, there's Kingston's also pretty high in fats and sugar as well. If you look at one biscuit and how many calories it has in it and work out how long you have to run on the treadmill to burn that, that's a consideration. But it's not only about that, it's what nutrients do you get. Think about your blood sugar and think about calories as a bank account. How much nutrition are you depositing for the cost of those calories? And you'll start to eat a lot better if you think depositing more than you are withdrawing by eating items that aren't really contributing much nutrition. Another thing that people like to eat sometimes is rice crackers, those sort of things. They are high GI, low in fat, but you do need to add protein to them if you're going to eat them. Don't eat them by themselves because they're low in fat. That is contraindicated or not helpful. Looking at crisps or chips and mashed potato and then a baked potato, you see how much lower a baked potato is. Potatoes are not really bad. Roast vegetables are fine. It's only when you add a huge amount of oil or cream to those things that they become loaded with calories. So think about baked potatoes, roast vegetables as your alternative to some good form of carbohydrate. Potatoes are not necessarily bad to include. Depends on how you've cooked them.
What about the idea of potato? And certainly people are out there now thinking, wow, because potatoes are ruled out as bad in GI.
Yep.
So what's your interpretation on things like potato, and you also mentioned rice crisps as well,
yes,
to avoid that?
Yep, so as far as rice cakes and that sort of thing, try and go for the whole grain and brown version and add protein. So if you're adding lean protein to that, like your low-fat cottage cheese or some salmon, then it's going to balance it out. Turkey, some avocado would also lower the GI. So it's going to stabilize how fast that item releases the sugar. Then that becomes appropriate, but you're going to have an appropriate amount with that meal. Whereas a lot of people, when they are on diet as such, they will carry around a packet of rice crackers, and when they're getting hungry, they'll eat half the packet. That's not good. You could be eating jelly beans.
So what you're saying, just for the people listening in, obviously that's really important. That's a really, really important point. You've said that you can alter the GI.
That's right.
Of certain foods
by adding protein. You can lower the GI. Absolutely. So adding a protein item to 2 crackers is going to give you some carbohydrates, but also lower the insulin response.
Can you just explain to people what that actually means? What do you mean
so
by
your GI,
GI?
The glycemic index is a reading of when you eat a food. For example, jelly beans have a GI of just about 100 or so. That means when you eat them, they start being absorbed into your bloodstream extremely fast. And how long does it take your insulin to start pumping to reduce your blood sugar again? So all different carbohydrates is what you apply it to. All those different foods, they have a different reading. So whole grain seeded bread, anything below 50 odd is low and good for carbohydrates. Anything above that is getting a bit higher. As soon as you get above 70, then yeah, you want to make sure that that item is combined with some good form of protein and vegetables to bulk out that meal so you're not getting hungry again in a hurry.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the second question from that is why are we told not to eat things like potato and rice and so forth?
Because people often will eat a whole plate of pasta is a great example. People will eat a whole plate of pasta with cheese and a creamy sauce on that. That's a massive amount of fat and carbohydrates combined together, and often the vegetables are left out, and often there's no protein because restaurants are going to try and make things in the least expensive way as possible. So people get into the habit of eating a bowl of only fried carbohydrates, whether that be potato chips, and they add fatty sauces to that. So not only are you not getting any nutrients to that, so they've got a bad rap. And also, pastries, another thing as well, it's cheap to produce, and companies will produce it if people buy it and eat it. So as consumers, it's up to us to make wise decisions, and then they will start to produce things that are better nutritional value because people will buy it. But yes, so it's just awareness. So, and another thing on potatoes as well, cold potatoes have a lower GI than hot potatoes. Mashed potato has an even higher GI than a baked potato because you've broken down the starch content. So it's absorbed quicker when you've mashed it. Okay, and baby potatoes, cold baby potato salad has a much lower GI than hot mashed potato, for instance. So if you're going to use baby cold potatoes in a salad with protein, that's appropriate. That's a good way to combine them still and use them. So they're not bad. You don't have to cut them out completely.
And of course, they do provide essential nutrients.
They do. They've got all sorts of, that's right, a good combination of nutrients that your body needs to have. Carbohydrates are a really important source of your vitamin B complex. So as soon as you cut them out and eat a very, very low carb diet, you often are deficient in your vitamin Bs. Yeah. And then having a look at milk. So a lot of milk naturally has a lot of sugar in it. So that's a good reason to not have too much of it. You can get why would you have milk? Because you can get some protein and some calcium from it. If you're eating lots of nuts and seeds and green leafy vegetables and an alkaline producing diet, you don't need to have a lot of milk, and you're often better off not having an overdose of milk. You can drink low calorie beverages and add lots more nuts and seeds and healthy raw whole foods rather than having a lot of people do not manage very well. They feel better when they don't have loads of milk.
Be fair to say though that for those people that are watching in that want to put size on,
yes,
for the first 5 or 6 weeks they should be having a
considerable milk is a source. Yes, milk is a source of whey, which is a good source of protein. And if you're trying to bulk up and you want to build muscle, yes, and for those who find it difficult to increase mass, definitely milk is a good way to do it.
Hear that, ladies? So if you want to put on weight, drink milk.
That's right, especially full fat milk. Okay, so processed meats. Now, you've got your Fritz there, or what you call it here. Yes, Fritz. Processed deli slice. And then you've got some tuna. And then you have some ham. So you see how little fat the tuna has. So tinned salmon or tuna is an easy way to add a good amount of protein, but the salmon has some good fats in it. You'll get some omega-3. But the processed deli meats, you're going to get saturated fats as well as a whole bucket load of nitrates, which is not something you want to have long term. It's not healthy for you. So you're much better off to eat boiled and cooked chicken breast that you've cooked yourself, turkey that you've cooked yourself the day before, and slice that up and put that onto food, and not rely on deli meats very much, seldomly, and bacon. Yeah.
Just on the point of nitrates, a lot of people don't understand what they actually do to human cells, and they are carcinogenic, meaning that they do break down.
It's known that they are carcinogenic, yes, and in your intestine, they affect your intestinal tissue, and so they've been associated with colon cancer.
They break down your cells and therefore can cause cancer. So anything carcinogenic, like our foods, and a lot of the foods that we have out there with nitrates in them, are potentially dangerous to us and can cause cancer if you have already
excess.
got that cell damage. We all have it in our
Yes.
system. It's whether that's going to affect you
And
or
a tendency
smoking will
towards
affect
that.
you. Yeah.
That's right. Everybody has a genetic tendency towards certain things, and nitrates are one of the things, especially if you increase your meat intake by eating those things on a bigger scale, on a daily scale. So try and always rely on other forms of protein that you've cooked yourself and you know are not full of nitrates. Also, a little tip is the darker the meat, the more nitrates it will have. So turkey slice, chicken slice will have less nitrates in it to preserve it than your salamis or your darker meats, percentage-wise.